Yes, that the whole notion of to read something is, if you spend a weekend in a country, have you really done that country? And sometimes when someone asks me, have you ever been to Hong Kong? And I tell them that I had a stopover at the airport when I didn't leave the airport, it's kind of like that doesn't really count. And allowing your eyes just to pass over the Odyssey once and say, well, I've done that, to me doesn't really seem to cut it, because it does an awful lot more than that. And each time you reread it, you will get more from it. And hopefully, the aim is that I want to try and share with you some of my experiences of the book, and hopefully enhance your reading each time. It doesn't want to move screens. Okay, so I won't go through the poem because we have heard it now. So today what I want to do is to invite you just to talk about what you thought of book one, and if there's a particular thing that you want to raise, want to discuss about it, then that is great. I'll also want to talk about one kind of key idea in the Odyssey, which I think, without wanting to oversell it, I think will transform the way that you experience the rest of the poem, or all of the poem, once you get to terms with it. So very briefly, just welcoming our new recruits. Our intention is to read blind, so we'll aim as far as possible. We know roughly what's happening. Odysseus is trying to get home. No secrets about that. And you can probably form an idea as to whether he's successful or not, but without wanting to fill in too much of where we're going. So we won't be doing too many plot spoilers, which is amusing, really, given the book is 2,800 years old. So this is where we are. We're in the Mediterranean. And where's Troy got to? Troy is up here. So it is believed that the poem was written maybe around here, we think. And there really was a siege of, well, not a siege of Troy, there was a battle of Troy, we think, in about the 12th century BC. So this is the Mediterranean. We think of it as Greece. Of course, it wasn't Greece at the time, and it hasn't been Greece really that long as a real independent country. Fagles uses the term the Greeks, but that's just because we know what he means, and it saves a lot of time. Where Odysseus is aiming to get back to is Ithaca.
Just down near the bottom.
Down near the bottom. And my sister and her husband have a place in the middle of Lefkada. So long before I really knew about the Odyssey, I realized recently that I'd actually seen Ithaca, but it didn't mean anything to me at all. It hadn't really made an impact on me. So this is where Odysseus is trying to get back to. Okay, very, very briefly, just a little bit about the sort of the timeline. The 3,000 or so years BC, the Bronze Age dawned, and there were migrations. I mean, there have been countless migrations all the way around Europe, as of course all the way around the world, and Greece has continually been invaded and fought over, even within the past 100 years or so. It was brutally invaded by the Germans and at a terrible time, so nothing new there. The Mycenaean culture flourished around about 1700 BC to around about 1200 BC, and then there was and there's still no clear understanding of why this happened. There was a systemic collapse of the whole Mycenaean culture. The involvement of this mysterious set of people called the Sea Peoples seems to be part of it. The current thinking seems to be something like it was kind of like a row of dominoes falling, that when you had some of the key cities fall because of trading conditions or whatever, their economy collapsed, and that had knock-on effects. And so comprehensive was this Bronze Age collapse in this part of the world that they even lost writing. They already had, in this period, they had a form of writing based on Phoenician script, Linear A and Linear B, I'm sure you've heard of. It was lost round about this time. This is all absolutely directly relevant to the Odyssey. It's not just general background. And it's sort of coincidental that it was round about this time that the new technology of iron comes into play. And there really was, there seems to have been a battle at Troy. It seems to have been burnt to the ground repeatedly over the years, actually. Heinrich Schliemann, the archaeologist with a bulldozer in the 19th century, we'll talk about him later on in the year, discovered or rediscovered Troy, hollowed it out, did some terrible damage. But our Troy, this Troy, is, I think it's called 7A or 7B. It's one of those two. In other words, the city was repeatedly destroyed, and what they did was they just kind of flattened it with the rubble and built on top. So it's like a layer cake, and the archaeologists can study the technologies and the archaeology of each of these layers. Now, there is a long gap then of 450 years. These are very approximate dates, and there's still disagreements that you won't get consensus about this, but we think it's round about this time that the Iliad and the Odyssey are written down. Now, the extraordinary thing about it is that the poem contains an awful lot of bronze, which must mean that it's very old. It also contains some references to iron. There is one fragmentary possible reference to writing in the works of Homer, but it's even then when it's raised, it's kind of mysterious and nobody quite knows what the writing is, sort of thing. So this is a pre-literate culture. So the poem existed as in oral culture for a long time. And then the Iron Age ends around about 600 BC, and then Athenian democracy is founded about a century later. Okay, so again, just as quickly, a real quick setting this into context, the judgment of Paris. So Hera, the goddess of discord, was not invited to a wedding because she was going to get all the relatives fighting, which is what happens with weddings, but she wasn't invited. So out of annoyance, she lobs an apple into the wedding, which has a golden apple, which has inscribed on it, "To the most beautiful." So there is then a battle between Hera, who is, can I say Hera? Get lost about the names. The wife of Zeus, Aphrodite, and Athena. And they go to Zeus and says, "You decide." And he is far too wise for this. He just, because you make one friend and win two enemies if you pick a winner out of that. So he plucks this guy, Paris, to come and judge between the three beautiful goddesses. And he is promised all of Europe and Asia. He is promised wisdom and skill in war. But Aphrodite promises him the most beautiful woman in the world. So that's what he goes for. And the most beautiful woman in the world turns out to be Helen of Sparta. Helen of Sparta. She is a wife with Menelaus in Sparta. Okay, so she's Helen of Sparta. And Paris comes along. Is he invited by King Menelaus, treated royally as a very important person? Menelaus makes the terrible mistake of going off on business and leaving Paris and Helen together. And Paris does the most despicable thing. We'll see later this morning quite what is so horrific about this. He steals Helen of Sparta and takes her to Troy. Menelaus is, of course, incandescent and gets his brother Agamemnon to form an alliance of all of the different kings of the region. Greece, but you know, the islands and different little kingdoms, Mycenae, Sparta, Pylos, and Ithaca, of which Odysseus is king, and says, right, we're going to go get Helen back. So they set sail, get to Troy. It takes 10 years. There is a siege of Troy for 10 years, even before they get going. And this too is relevant, and we'll explain something that will puzzle you as you go through the book, unless you get a grip on it. And I don't expect all of this to sink in straight away, but little bits of it will start to fall in. So Agamemnon has this huge 1,000 ships. It's actually 1,176 to be accurate. Ships about to set sail for Troy, and they are becalmed. They cannot move. And it turns out that there was some inattention paid when they were making sacrifices to the gods. So the gods were being sulky about this and said, "You're not going anywhere, sunshine, unless you make the right reparation." So what is needed is for Agamemnon to sacrifice his daughter, Iphigenia. So he sends word back home to his wife Clytemnestra, saying, "Great news, Clytemnestra and Iphigenia, come on over. I'm going to marry you, my daughter, to Achilles." So it's a blood-curdling scene. You imagine the mother and the daughter coming over with great excitement. They've got all their new clothes for the wedding and everything. Iphigenia turns up at the altar and is seized by the soldiers, and her throat is cut. And immediately the wind starts to blow. So it achieves what Agamemnon needed, which was to get to Troy. Not surprisingly, after the war, when Agamemnon gets home, he doesn't get quite the warm welcome he was hoping for from Clytemnestra. Okay? She murders him in his bath. So that's the reason why this comes up in the Odyssey so much, is that it's an example of what is at stake. Odysseus is trying to get home to Ithaca. He doesn't know what he's going to face. He doesn't know whether Penelope is still alive. He doesn't know whether his kingdom still exists, even whether there's another king in place. He doesn't know what's happened to his son Telemachus, who was a baby at the time. So if you like, this is a kind of black cloud on the horizon. And Homer repeatedly refers to what happens. Not least of all because Clytemnestra's son then kills Clytemnestra's partner. So the blood feud continues. So there's a kind of coded message there. Okay, so Helen of Sparta becomes Helen of Troy. The Greeks get over there. They spend 10 years and they can't knock the walls down. And eventually it comes down to a trick from Odysseus, because that's his thing. Very, very cunning, very smart, very tricksy kind of a guy. And he invents the wooden horse. The Greeks all pretend to sail away. They go around the corner. The Trojans come out and say, "Oh, at last they've decided to give it up." They have left this great wooden horse. They debate on what to do. Eventually they regard it as being a gift. Hence the saying about, beware Greeks bearing gifts. They bring the horse within the walls, and then overnight, when all is quiet, a door in the horse opens and the soldiers come out and open the gates. All of the Greeks flood in. The slaughter is horrific. It's offensively horrific even for the time. The gods are appalled at what the Greeks do. This kind of pent up, this has taken us 10 years. They kill all of the men and some of the children, indeed, as well. Enslave all of the women. Cassandra, who is a priestess, is raped at the altar. So that's about as foul a sacrilege as it's possible to commit. So the gods are mightily displeased with the Greeks. So their journey home is more difficult than it would have been otherwise. Okay. But there is a mystery. Everyone seems to have got home, as we will discover when Telemachus goes out on his journey in books 2, 3, and 4. Everyone has got home apart from Odysseus. Where is he? Nobody seems to know where he is. He's disappeared for 10 whole years. So the siege takes 10 years, and now he's been missing for 10 years. Okay, so that's the background to the Odyssey. You just turn that off because I've talked for quite long enough. So I would like to open up a discussion about book 1 and a couple of observations. There's no such thing as a wrong reading of this. And I know because I've read some of the weirdest readings from all kinds of critics who read all kinds of things into the Odyssey. And there is no question that is dumb about it. If you say, "I really don't understand this," don't feel that you will be the first person ever to have asked that. You're almost certainly not. And the other thing is, Pronunciations, don't worry about it. As long as we know who you're talking about, don't feel you've got to say it the same way as everyone else. I've listened to quite a few podcasts about the Odyssey. They can't agree either. So don't worry about that. So who's going to be brave enough to say something about their experience of reading the first book?
Asked about Poseidon, visiting Ethiopia. It's about lines 101.
Yes.
And they say Ethiopia is divided into two, where the sun rises and where the sun sets.
Yeah.
And I'm just intrigued by that. Why is it divided into two? Do you know anything about that?
I don't. I think it's something to do with it being so far south or something like that, a long way away. But it is interesting that he's gone off to visit the Ethiopians. Egypt occurs within the poem a few times, is referred to, and also a mysterious thing that. So I don't know the answer to your question. It might be worth me pursuing that. Odysseus is asked several times about who he is and where he's come from. Comes up with a different story each time. He's been in different parts of the world. So he's very canny and doesn't like to give away where he's been. Who else? Well done.
I think there's a strong sense of humour. I know we're only sitting out on the first chapter, but I'm not quite sure if it's favourable towards humans and their thoughts. They're quite wicked way, and I don't understand their game. I know it's like I've only read
the game.
I thought it's a bit of a game, but for amusement for them.
The gods.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's why I think some of the silliness, like you're right about the pronunciations, the sound of
Telemachus. Yeah.
Like that. And just all these things, and that the gods keep interjecting so that the story continues. It's like poor human beings are just floundering like school fish. I'm sure it's going to pick up, but at the moment, I just think someone's got a wicked sense of humour.
Well, you're making loads of very, very good points, because I do think it is a very, very funny, warm book. And in particular, there's a hilarious episode when Odysseus washes up on a beach naked and comes across this young princess Nausicaa. And their interaction is hilarious. It really makes me, it's so kind of warm and human. And there are many of those. I mentioned in the email, I think yesterday or the day before, anytime somebody turns up on Ithaca, they always say to them, well, how did you get here? I don't suppose you walked. It's like, it's such a silly little joke, but it's the kind of thing that islanders say. They regard outsiders as being, these weird people from abroad. But that's a very good question that you raised, because I think it's one of the hardest things for us to try and imaginatively make the leap to, is this understanding that there is in Homer of the gods are always coming down and inhabiting other people. Athena and Odysseus have this extraordinarily kind of intimate relationship. It's platonic. I mean, there's no kind of sexual aspect to it, unlike two of the other goddesses that Odysseus encounters. But she really, really cares for him, and she looks after him. So sometimes when it suits him, he can look really old and withered and haggard like an old beggar, so he can pass unseen. But then when she sprinkles on the magic dust, suddenly he's this magnificent, huge warrior man. But you're right, because I think one of the things the poem is interested in is, do human beings have free will? Can they decide what to do? Because if this is all decided by the gods, then what is left for humans to do? And in fact, right at the beginning, when the gods first meet, I don't know if anyone's can find this faster than me. They actually, Zeus says exactly this. In book 1 at the council, where the gods meet. Does anyone remember? You'll find it. What line are we at? 75 of book 1. Yeah.
There's humans bring.
Yes, that's it. Yeah. Where is that? What line is that?
It says about the guy that was told not to.
Yeah.
That's for Odyssey, so it's not yeah.
But even that, I think is like, oh, they're just dumb.
Oh yeah, here we are, line 37. Yeah. Ah, how shameless the way these mortals blame the gods.
Yeah.
From us alone, they say, come all their miseries. Yes.
Yeah.
But they themselves, with their own reckless ways, compound their pains beyond their proper share.
But don't the gods do the same for humans? That we torture them and we're just there for their playthings. To me, there's a reciprocal role, because without us being your amusement, it wouldn't be anything.
Well, that's true, and they're very, very needy, the gods. They need to be worshipped and have sacrifices all of the time. It is a very different concept of the upper world than we have in Christianity, where God is omniscient and omnipotent and one, or 3 in 1 anyway. There are lots and lots of gods, and they are kind of like childish humans. I mean, they're as you said earlier, Deborah, they're having sex with each other, with their own family, fathers and mothers and brothers and sisters and daughters, eating each other and, bickering. And it's peculiar that, because the opportunity for this council comes because Poseidon is away. So they can say, right, okay, now he's gone. He's the only one that's still got a grudge against Odysseus, and we will find out why that grudge is there. So yeah, I'm glad you spotted the humor in it, and I think that's very, very true. It's a very human poem. Odysseus constantly thinking about food, cries quite repeatedly. There is sex in this poem. There is hatred and there is love. And as for Telemachus, you're right. He's very young and very callow. He's 20 years old. He's never had a father around. He's a mummy's boy. Exactly right. So the dynamic is that Hermes is going to go off and tell Calypso, you've got to let Odysseus go. 7 years, come on, it's time he was on his way. So he's headed off in that direction. Athena is going to go down and stir Telemachus up. So the situation. Well, would anyone like to talk about what the experience is like? What is it like at Ithaca? What is that world?
What's been going on? That's what the question. That reference to suitors with a capital S. I wondered who they are. Are they the young people, the 20-year-olds? Are they older men wanting to marry Penelope? What are they all doing hanging around this palace?
Yeah.
Sort of in the way. Then he decides to get rid of them. Eventually, he's only 20, so it's not.
I actually felt a lot of sympathy for him at that point, because he is only 20, he's standing there and going, this would appear to be my place, and you're killing my goats and drinking my wine and eating my grains and trying to get on to my mother, and this is not right.
I should do something.
Fair. I'm cross. He is only 20.
Yeah, but that in that society, 20 is quite old. I mean, Alexander did his first conquest at 16.
But he had Philip, who was Telemachus' god.
Kept his vow. And it's yeah, I find that quite interesting. Why it's this seemingly adult Greek, because that's a Greek man would be adults quite soon. He's obviously just been in this situation. I'm sure the suitors would probably be a range of all ages. I mean, a lot of the men were off to fight, so they would not be the old ones. They'd probably be between, someone else said, about 20 and 40. and just from like the local areas. Ithaca itself is only really quite small together. So any of the other little kingdoms or islands or anyone who's got a bit of what's that?
So we know there's 108 of them. And yes, some of them will be returned soldiers from the war, and others will be those who never went to the war. So we will be talking about Telemachus and about his journey, because he's got his own Odyssey to experience. He's got his own travels to do, and we'll talk about what Athena has got in mind for him. But think for a moment about Penelope's situation.
Okay. He calls it council, doesn't he?
Yes.
And they don't support it, they say get over it.
Yeah. And
And that's where he got my sympathy. So I thought, hang on,
When they're trying it on, if they got that.
so I understood that they were fellow citizens.
so the council is of the Ithacans, so none of the suitors, although there are some suitors, as it turns out, among them. And it's kind of a double-edged sword, because as a plus, we're told it's the first council that's happened since Odysseus went. And as soon as Telemachus stirs himself to action and holds a council, that's the beginnings of the return to kind of organized civic society. So he gets a big tick for that. It doesn't go well, but of course he's had no practice, and neither has anyone else. And you're right, they are too timid to do anything. They could, if they organized and came together, they could easily overcome these suitors.
Like us, there, the baseline city council disappears, the council is efficient. And it's 10 years, if you've had your garbage for it.
But imagine any society that has all of the adult men removed. And in such a sexist society as we're talking about here, it's even stronger. Of course, the women were very, very severely limited, not allowed out very much at all outside. Certainly didn't get any say in how things are done, which is why Penelope is such a remarkable character when we get to meet her really very well. But thinking about Penelope, think about her situation. It's horrific. Yeah.
I think the introduction of the sun, which such innocence of youth, I guess, is so complementary to the story to express the setup. Like, you can see that I don't know if it's one or two, it's a great way to introduce, they're talking about the old world and culture, the old men, society, what's happened, and then hopefully the new society with all these vulnerabilities and, like you said, timid, whatever. But isn't that what we all experience sometimes in life when we get introduced to something? You are shy and perhaps you try to them and things like that. So I think the way that it's been plotted so early on, even though sensibility that's come in, it's a wonderful introduction to see through different people's eyes through different ages.
I think that's something I found, that there's a wonderful shift of point of view by every page. So, if you go from, I find my sympathies moving around all the time, because when they're describing it, when he's describing Telemachus, and he's being fired up by this goddess and going to do it, and he goes to bed on his little feet. and then Penelope is wonderful, because she makes such an entrance into this, the veil and the two handmaidens and by the like standing by the column. that was such a good dramatic entrance. And then I even found myself sympathizing with these hooligans, because there's such a lovely description of their of the way they let go, and there's a lovely line that says something about they brimmed
they're mixing, they brewed their mixing cups with wine. I think that was it. They
Yeah.
brewed them. And I thought that was just help. And I thought, oh, that sounds good. So I really love the movement around it from, and you get the way, and you can imagine the guys up there laughing at me.
Yeah.
I think it's a great point that you make. Sorry, is it Shirley?
Sure.
An extraordinarily good point about what Telemachus adds to the story, because he is Penelope can't be in a military sense. She is in the psychological sense, and we'll get to see just how important she is. You know, and she's every bit Odysseus's intellectual equal. But so Telemachus can represent an internal ally, and of course, what Odysseus is struggling to get home for. This is his future, as you say, is the potential for his kingdom. So Telemachus has to both be not his father's equal, because if he's his father's equal, he doesn't need his dad and he can do it himself, but also has to have the potential. And where is that potential going to be brought out? It's when he gets reunited with his father and they go on this adventure at home together to overcome the suitors. But Penelope's situation is, it's the worst possible. She doesn't know if she's a widow or a wife, whether Odysseus is alive or dead. And because she has to do the right thing. If he's dead, it's her duty, her obligation to the kingdom to remarry, because otherwise it cannot continue. You need a strong male leader. You couldn't possibly have a woman in charge of a kingdom like this at this time. So that would be her duty, her obligation, and she would be absolutely doing the right thing, but only if she knows he's dead. If he's alive, her duty and her obligation is, of course, not like Clytemnestra to take another lover, you know. So she's in this impossible, tortured situation. And if you think about the kind of the big movements of the book, Odysseus is somewhere out in the world trying to get home. Penelope is defending home as best as she can using cunnings and wiles. And Telemachus needs to go and experience something of the world to give him some of the mental equipment and understanding to be able to be a suitable ally for when his father gets home.
To me, it's like all the people are locked into a siege mentality themselves, because for 10 years, all these cities have been certainly in place. Obviously, it took a while for Telemachus to grow up, and when he's grown up, or about 20, you know, he's telling his mother what to do when she came down, and he's trying to take on some kind of mantle of leadership or mantle of adulthood, manhood. And the suitors, I mean, not any one of them can, on his own accord, do something to get out of this situation. So they're all stuck. The whole situation is stuck until, obviously, Odysseus, the hero, until the hero returns, basically.
Yeah, so when you think about the decision of whoever decides to tell this, there's many different ways you could tell this story. You could begin from Odysseus's point of view. He leaves Troy, where he goes, and tell the story in that way. But this is so much a better way, because we're dropped in right in the middle of the crisis. You know, the siege is the siege of Ithaca, now no longer the siege of Troy, but the siege of Penelope is reaching fever point. You know, it cannot continue like this. It's almost over. And wherever Odysseus is, if he gets back too late, he may as well not get back at all. So there's a sense of crisis, a sense of urgency. And this shifting, as you were talking about, Rena, the shifting viewpoints, you get to see what life is like at Ithaca, and very soon we'll get to see what life is like in other places. So you're getting a real insight into what is at stake, what Odysseus needs to get home for. You know, that Penelope is still this beautiful, vibrant, very intelligent woman and the love of his life. And his son, who was just a babe in arms when he left, has now grown up into this young man who desperately needs his father to come home. So it's a wonderful telling.
As a literary device to start off,
in the first chapter with the chaos. If you want people to keep reading, that is a pretty clever device. Because, you know, you start reading a book and there's no issues to resolve, or, you know, one of which you keep reading. So I think that whole chaotic situation is quite being read on.
Absolutely. And at the same time, there is this release in book one as well. The gods have decided that Odysseus now he's been trapped, he's been stuck in his own kind of paralysis, an unwilling prisoner. He's now freed, so now he can start to head home. It's only later we're going to discover what that journey is like for him. But so you kind of got these two worlds, and the spring of the action is now Odysseus is beginning to move back to where it's all going to happen.
But there's a tension between the gods and the human, because who really control so that tension as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and to what extent, as we just read, to what extent are the humans extending their own misery? It's almost like the gods kind of set the direction in which things are going to happen, the kind of the potential and the opportunity, and say, right, now it's over to you. You know, we've given you we've given you sufficient to make it work or to screw it up. Over to you.
Is that then they keep interfering?
Well, yes. I do, actually. I do. And it is, as I say, it's one of the hardest things for us to come to terms with, because the humans genuinely seem to believe that they're being inspired. I mean, this happens a lot in the Iliad when there are battles, and you are winning your battle. You have this sense that you are being blessed by the gods.
It's like the Second World War, you know, especially First World War, there's the troops.
Absolutely. And especially in the States, what the first thing any footballer does when he scores a goal is to give thanks to God. Was like, what? God is on your side, but not the other side? Is he on both sides? You know,
the gods they can be fighting amongst themselves. Yeah. We had one god who can't do that.
So I would now like to introduce to you. Yeah, please do.
Book one starts to be right in the action. Yeah, but before that, I was really impressed by the first stanza, which I think was fabulous. So I just thought I thought the chorus was wonderful. It seemed to me as a man twisted, and you get this whole big, we're for a really big story here. So you get the whole vista in that lovely poetry, and then you go right into bang, you know, the weaving. Oh, surprised that weaving came up so early. That's about the only thing I know about Odyssey, really. And so, but you're right in it. You've got this big vista, that fabulous introduction. This is going to be really exciting, big story. And then you're down, it's swollen with the suitors. Oh, it's fabulous.
But even without the way,
You go next.
About
the
singer that PH, I can't remember his name. He is one of the suitors, but he's the one who is entertaining them with a story, and he's very complimentary, you know, about how wonderful the poet is.
And then doesn't somebody try to shut it up or something?
Yeah, but well, she comes down, that's Penelope tries to shut him up, because she's like, but so then it was says, no, it's a fantastic book. Go on, please.
Gillian.
Sorry.
No.
But even without the gods, that could have happened. I mean, that island was pretty, it's in a terrible state, isn't it? And something usually happens. He has decided to adopt a stronger attitude and do something. Something would have happened. I mean, you could sort of take the gods out of it and think, what would happen on that island without the king? What would happen? Surely one of them, something, the sun would have activated himself to do something. So you don't sort of need it then, she has activated it. But you could imagine a situation where an island is just racked and ruined.
Yeah.
Nobody's doing anything. Someone will come.
Absolutely, and it would have happened all of the time. You know, it's like a pack of lions or something that, you know, the alpha male gets to be king, but only as long as he can fight off everybody else. If there's a stronger young male around, you know, the sense of inherited kings is not that strong at this point.
I was gonna say, how big is Ithaca? Was it a bit like, do they have like city states? And that's, isn't 18th century Italy, how they have the city states. They have all those Greek islands. And you have obviously the Lord, like Odysseus, ones like that. So they are like little city states that can be friendly to each other and be guided at other times.
Ithaca is barely 30 miles from one end to the other. It's kind of, there's a sort of almost like a figure of eight. It's very narrow in the middle, very rocky at both ends. Very poor country for growing things in. I mean, one of the things you notice is they're always feasting, eating, you know, cattle and all kinds of things. The Greek diet would have been, at this time, would have been nothing like that at all. They would have been surviving on grain and, you know, that sort of stuff very much more. So it's very, very, very poor country. We know that Odysseus has some territory on the mainland as well. He's got cattle kind of on the mainland. Someone is sent over to go and get some to bring it back. But yeah, I mean, I think the city-state concept is pretty accurate. The Mycenaean, there's a whole subject on this that we will get onto in a future session about whether Ithaca is Ithaca, whether it really is Ithaca. There's huge debates which have gone on forever about this.
See your badge. Sorry, I can't even see that. But I just wanted to point out, and the way I think you said it starts off with a bang, but wouldn't that be the tradition? Because when you did your timeline, etc., even though there were practices, because that was the only way. You said you had 17 to 1200. There was literature, two types. Then there seemed to be fading on it, or whether it was destroyed or whatever, because there must have been some communication between them, etc. Accounting, everything, the trade. But is that a style that just because it's so comfortable in it, the way it starts off? So like the bars, you'd have to, like if you walk into a court or a palace, you'd have to get the people's attention because you'd have certain people pulling the wine, etc. And so you'd have to be very strong in the presentations. So I feel that your point is amazing, and I think it's something that we've been highly developed.
Yeah, you're absolutely right in everything that you have said. It's a long oral tradition. There is no agreement at all about how the Odyssey was, or the Iliad was delivered. It's thought that it was probable that that you would have people assembling for it, so they wouldn't have to win silence, because you would have booked this. You know, he would be well rewarded for his troubles, and would come along. They think it may have been associated with festivals, so that the bard would come along, and it's kind of chanted. It wasn't kind of spoken like Shakespeare, but possibly it would approximately take kind of 3 long sessions to deliver the whole of the Odyssey. What seems, at the beginning, because he says, Muse, basically, you tell me where to start. I can start anywhere, because everyone knows this story. No one is going to learn anything new about the journey of Odysseus to Ithaca. So it's something they're all familiar with. So my own kind of analogy for this is, I think if you think of certain kinds of comedians, if you've seen, like Will Anderson or Eddie Izzard or Billy Connolly, they've got a spine to their show. But once they have the spine down, they will then start to extemporize and improvise and talk to the audience and try out new bits. So I think that this whole cycle of story was honed over hundreds of years, and you would get to know, because you get a great reaction to some of this stuff if you tell it in a certain way. If you tell it, say, once upon a time Odysseus left Troy after the end of the war, it'd be like, kind of, God, we've heard this 100 times before. And I think so some of the twists that happen at really unexpected times, I almost can imagine the bard who's got this, because he's been wandering around all the islands. You know, he's repeated this material 100 times, but these people have never heard this story told in this way. And he knows it's going to knock their socks off. He's thinking, I'll give them a good hour, my solid hour. And just when they think that they know what they're getting, I'm going to hit them with my best gear, and it's going to blow their absolute socks off. There is still now no understanding at all as how these poems got captured into writing. There are very, very early references to it, only around about the 5th century or so. And lots of people, Aristotle and Plato, and people quoting from the Odyssey. So you can kind of then start to reconstruct the way that it was. But it appears to have come down largely through Alexandria. So in about the 3rd century BC, the library at Alexandria, what they used to do was, because it's such a key port, they would inspect your ship. If you got any manuscripts or, you know, of treasured poetry or songs or whatever, they would take those off you, copy them out. You got the copy. They kept the original. So they built up this extraordinary library. And that's when they first started studying the variants, because they'd be getting different versions of these poems. But just to go back to what you were saying before, none of the literature that survives from the Mycenaean culture, from earlier than the 12th century, none of it is literary. It's all, almost all forms of writing in all cultures around the world begin with top dogs trying to work out how much tax people should be paying, you know, how many slaves they own, how many slave women, how much land Keith has got, and therefore how much tax he needs to be paying me as his contribution. So it's extraordinary that this is the first literature, the first writing of any kind in our culture. And these two extraordinary complete poems, we know that they're only tiny samples of a much, much bigger corpus of books and stories. There's whole epic cycles of which we have no trace, or tiny, tiny fragments. And yet we have these two things complete. And you think about the difficulty of getting a highly oral tradition, which is what we've just been talking about, how you capture that on paper, because the guy who can deliver a poem like that can't write. And anyone who can write, well, you try stopping me if I'm giving you 1,000 lines of my best stuff, and you get to line 3 and you say, hang on, can we just go back a bit, because I didn't quite, who said what to who now? That's not going to work.
Is there anything other cultures that is similar? You know, sometimes other cultures have similar episodes happening at the time. Is there any parallel?
Many parallels. And in fact, I'm saving it up because I don't want to give this away too soon, because we'll be talking about this in a future session. The now commonly, the story that I've just said about it being an oral tradition was only cracked, you know, in the last 120 years. In the 20th century, Milman Perry, a young scholar, came up with this theory and went and demonstrated it, in sort of Yugoslavia by studying oral poets, still surviving oral poets in sort of what's now kind of Yugoslavia, that sort of part of the world, and talked about how they operated in the real world. I think one of the things that's made it difficult to study the Odyssey and the Iliad is that it's studied by literary critics who know how books are written. So there's been strings and heaps of criticism about inconsistencies in the story, for example. You know, that phrase Homer nods is basically referring to the fact that there are inconsistencies in the Odyssey, and especially in the Odyssey versus the Iliad. Well, in an oral tradition, that's not an issue. That's not what you're not looking for consistency in. You're not going to put your hand up halfway through the performance and say, excuse me, I'll interrupt, because when we had another bard 5 years ago, he distinctly said that Theseus's brother was not in fact as you. Shut up. Not welcome. It's there, it's very much in the present, in the moment, and in the mind of the bard. Now I'm gonna push on, because I would like to introduce to you, as I say, I'm not overselling it, a mind-blowing concept, which I think feels to me like exactly what the Odyssey is about. What the Odyssey is about. This is xenia, from which we get the English word xenophobia, which is a phobia, a fear of strangers. Okay, so that's the abstract now, xenia. So, but it refers to the law and custom of offering protection and hospitality to strangers. You think about Odysseus spends 10 years away from home. Where is he? Who's he staying with? And there's kind of two ways at this time of being away from home. No Airbnb, no hotels. You didn't know anyone overseas. You didn't have friends, you know, I'll come and visit you and you can come to my place next summer, that kind of thing. Not in the way that we would think of that. So there's two ways of visiting. You can either rape and pillage and just take what people have got, which is what the Greeks are doing at Troy. They are besieging the city. They are stripping the whole coast for supplies and for women and for slaves. Zoom has decided to disconnect and reconnect. That's useful for me to know, but I think I will have learned from whatever. Let's come back on again. No, because I actually have the full professional one. What does that say? No, I can't read that. What does that say?
Use video.
Use video. Okay. I don't know why it's done that. So you can either take things by force, or there is this, xenia. We think of fear of but xenia is a much bigger concept than that. And it was so fundamental to the Greek, to the people that we now call the Greeks, that it was ordained by Zeus. So Zeus, Xenios, Zeus, the god who protects strangers. So Zeus is the king of all of the gods, and this is his domain. That's how important and how sacred it was to them. Proto-Indo-European root word, hosti, I don't know how the hell you would pronounce that. A person with whom the law of hospitality applies. Guess what words we get from that? Not ghost, but host, hospitality, exactly. But also hostile, enemy, refers to outsiders, whether they're friendly or not, and also guest. Okay. So that's so. If xenia is the abstract noun, and xenos can mean the following different things. Now, this is quite amazing, really. It can mean a friend, it can mean a host, it can mean a guest, and it can mean a stranger and a foreigner. It's a really difficult thing for us to think that the same word refers to all of those different things. Okay? And you can see it in action throughout the Odyssey. What's the first example? We've already had it in book 1. What's the first example? When Mentes arrives when Athena arrives in the form of Mentes and is greeted by Telemachus. Now that's a very, very good example of this, but it's such a codified practice because it protects you if you're away from home. And if you can't rely on this, if you rock up to a stranger's place and he just slits your throat and takes all your goods, then it hasn't worked. There is an extraordinary, a very famous example in the Iliad that I want to draw your attention to, because it shows you the power of this. And it's in book 6 of the Iliad. I'm actually using Emily Wilson's big glasses. There they are. Emily Wilson's translation for no other reason than it was at hand. So this is a battle scene, and you will deduce that battle scenes in the Iliad are not war documentaries. This is not really what war is like. So it's between two warriors, one a Trojan and one a Greek, Glaucus and Diomedes. So they meet in the middle of the battlefield, both keen to fight. As they drew near each other, Lord Diomedes, master of the war cry, was first to speak. He shouted, "Who are you? Are you a mortal? You look very strong. I never saw you here before in battle where men win glory." So Diomedes shouts to Glaucus and then goes on for another 50 lines. But glorious Glaucus, son of Lord Hippolochus, said, "Diomedes, proud son of Tydeus, why do you ask me about my ancestry? The generations of men are like the growth and fall of leaves. The wind shakes some to earth, the forest sprouts new foliage, and springtime comes. So too, one human generation comes to be, another ends." Okay, so then he goes on for another 100 lines. And then the master of the war cry, Diomedes, was glad to hear these words. So they've told each other their ancestry, and they worked out that they know each other and that they have this relationship. He fixed his spear firm in the earth that feeds the world and spoke in friendship to the shepherd of the people. "So you must be an old guest friend of mine through our forefathers." So this practice, if I and Eliot meet, then my son James and daughter Rowena are bound to Eliot and Elsa with the same Xenia forever, and their children and their children. So we have now built an eternal alliance for as long as it's remembered and honoured. It's extraordinarily powerful. So now you and I are also loving guest friends, and I will visit you one day in Argos, and you will come to visit me in Lycia whenever I arrive back home again. So these are two warriors face to face in battle, and they say this: "So let us now avoid each other's spears, even amid the thickest battle scrum. Plenty of Trojans and their famous allies are left for me to slaughter. When a god or my quick feet enable me to catch them, and you have many other Greeks to kill whenever you're able, let us now exchange our arms and armour with each other, so other men will know that we are proud to be each other's guest friends through our fathers." With this, the two jumped off their chariots and grasped each other's hands and swore the truth, the oath. Okay, so that's how powerful it was that people on the battlefield, if they discovered that they had this relationship, this connection, it would transcend their national or bigger goal. Okay. So we've seen it in operation, and you know exactly how this works. And one of the admirable things about Telemachus is he knows this stuff. He knows how it works, and he performs it brilliantly. And in fact, you can codify from the Odyssey exactly how this is supposed to work, because his scenes, whenever these scenes take place, they can be abbreviated. It doesn't always have all of these, but where it does have them, it has them in exactly the same order. So first of all, Athena leaves the gods. Then she arrives at where she's going to. I mean, you think, well, how else would it work? But this is a very, very detailed formula. She finds a situation. There is a thing. There's something going on. There's some particular social situation, a crisis or a catastrophe or whatever. The host sees the guests, goes to meet them, is angry at their treatment. So when in the next chapter, Telemachus goes and meets Nestor or Menelaus, typically what happens is they don't meet the king. Telemachus doesn't meet the king. He meets one of the king's servants. And the servant comes to the king and says, "Shall I let him in?" And the king goes, "What are you talking about? Of course you let him in. Xenia, are you stupid?" So this kind of anger always takes place. He goes, takes their hand, offers food and greetings. Now, this is kind of where it gets real. You notice that the first thing that Telemachus does is not to ask Mentes who he is. He takes his armor gently away from them, so they're disarmed, so they're no threat. But he offers food and drink, so you make the person comfortable. You might even let them sleep overnight, but it's then, so they're seated, eat, food is prepared and consumed. And then the questions begin. So, mentees, where have you come from? I bet you didn't swim here. Okay. All right. And interestingly, there's also a slightly shorter departure formula as well, which tends to follow the same thing. So following on, the guest says, the one who says, look, it's time for me to go. I've really got to go. The host urges the guest to stay with promises of gifts and a send-off, and quite lavish gifts in a lot of cases. I was on a mountain top on an island, Lefkada, I think it was, 30 years ago, with my wife. We neither of us speak any Greek, and Bob, my brother-in-law, who does. It was Greek Easter Sunday, and there was an old Greek-speaking couple. They didn't speak any English at all, and they were cooking lamb on a barbecue, and they insisted that we join them, and they shared their food with us. They couldn't speak, you know, us and them kind of making gestures, and Bob trying to translate. And those of you who've been to Greece, I think some of us have been to Greece, they are an extraordinarily hospitable people. I've got a strong sense that the concept of xenia never reached France, for example. So the host urges the guest to stay with promises of gifts and a send-off. The guest makes further excuses. No, I really got to go. I can't stay around. It's almost like it's like a kind of polite fiction. You know, the host is saying, no, you really must stay. And the guest is saying, no, I really must go. And then they go. Okay. All right. Someone actually was singing he was singing the praises of the opening stanza. So we have looked at this. I'm not going to spend time on this now because we've got to briefly look ahead to books 2 and 3. Although there is this thing, the reason why Odysseus's men all die, 2 reasons actually. From the poet's point of view, he needs them killed off, because if Odysseus has got an army, when he gets back to Ithaca, it's a foregone conclusion. There's no heroics to be had. He just kind of sends the men in, they kill the suitors who are not expecting them, job done. So from a narrative point of view, Odysseus needs to be alone. More importantly, the way that they die is they devour the cattle of the sun, and the sun god wiped from sight the day of their return. So they committed a breach of xenia. They were explicitly told, do not eat the cattle of the sun. So what do? They eat the cattle of the sun and they pay the price.
What is the cattle of the sun?
We'll get to that. Elliot, a really good question. And in fact, this actually overstates what really happens. It's making a point here. But this is, in the background of this, is still this concept of xenia, that you don't mistreat another man's goods like this. So it's a story of a man. And in the Greek, the first word is andros. So this is a man. This is a story of a man. The Iliad begins with the Greek word for wrath or anger, because it's about the anger of Achilles. And it's really interesting what Shirley was saying before about the minds of the people, because that's what Odysseus does. He understands how people are thinking, and he knows the theory of mind. He knows what's going to motivate them. He knew enough about the Trojans to calculate that they would not set fire to the wooden horse, which was a debate. You know, they're tossing it up. Is this really, or should we? Oh, go on, then we'll let them in. And he kind of calculated ahead of them. The reckless of their own ways destroyed them all. And we have talked already about this, how shameless the way these mortals blame the gods. They blame us for all of their miseries, but they themselves, with their own reckless ways, the same word again, compound their pains beyond the proper share. Okay, we'll look ahead. It's only 15 minutes to go, and then we are free to go on, read books 2 and 3. Okay, what happens? So Telemachus calls an assembly, and then he heads to Pylos to see Mentor. Sorry, not to see Mentor. What am I talking about? To see Menelaus. Yeah, that's right. Sorry. I should say Menelaus. So Menelaus and Helen. Who does he see first? Actually, I think he sees Nestor. Sorry. Nestor, that should say. I do apologize. Nestor is an old windbag of a general from the Trojan War, who it turns out does not really have any real news to give Odysseus. kind of quite striking. Athena, you know, the goddess, has said, Telemachus, you must go and learn about your father from Nestor and from Menelaus. Doesn't really learn a lot about the real details of Odysseus. So what does he learn? What is he learning? What is the point of the journey? Why does Athena want him to go and see these old men?
I think it's more for his own development and maturity. And also it's a test because one minute she's putting him on a ship, but she organises it. That's a bit of a sad part. But she sort of puts it, she's putting him through the pace of, I'm going to put you on a boat, now I'm going to put you in horses, and things like this. So whatever he lacked in military skills during his, you know, teenage years, because they would have been trained in warfare and that at the age of 12, except around, from my understanding, you're wrong. But she's making up for lost time because he hasn't got any words of wisdom, knowledge, whatever, and these are my sons.
Yeah, exactly right. But social skills as well. I mean, he is learning from Nestor and from Menelaus.
Yeah.
They're kind of in loco parentis, they're kind of pseudo father figures. They are men of his father's generation, and he sees what a well-run kingdom looks like. You know, extraordinarily wealthy, extraordinarily generous, and the relationship between Nestor and his sons is really kind of affectionate, and it's something that Telemachus has never experienced. So no, it is for his own development. So sorry, that should say Nestor. So Nestor tells him about the return of the other heroes, but we don't know where Odysseus has gone. And then he sends Pisistratus, the son of his son, with Telemachus to Sparta to see Menelaus and Helen of Sparta. Troy, Sparta. She's now back home again. She's now Helen of Sparta again. Okay. And you begin to see the sophistication of the way that women are portrayed in the Odyssey, because she's almost like a shapeshifter in some of, you know, there's more going on with Helen. It's not completely clear, for example, when she goes away with Paris, whether she went willingly or not. That part of it is not told in the story, and it's kind of assumed by everyone at Troy, who hate her because she has caused the siege of Troy for 10 years. The Greeks hate her because she has caused the siege of Troy for 10 years. Everybody hates her. But so where her allegiances are, she actually met Odysseus in Troy. Odysseus got into Troy and she met him. And you will read about this in that book. She knew about the wooden horse, and yet she didn't blab. She could have done. So you begin to get a sense of how sophisticated she is. That leaves us just a few minutes for anything else that we've not touched on yet. Are we enjoying it so far? Is this going to be a good way to read the book?
Yeah.
And I'd encourage you, if you have the time, if you don't, then by all means not. But if you read book one again, now that it's kind of seeped into your mind a little bit, it kind of begins to open up.
This first time, I had problems with the answers.
Yeah.
People everywhere.
Yeah.
And book three is really very much that.
It is. It is. It does take some getting used to. Yeah.
So I was intrigued. So I don't have a need for that kind of literature. So I was reading it, the first Australian audience, this is poetry, this feels like poetry. And I thought, how else is there? Who is this person? And then I looked it up. It's Wikipedia explained the concept of epithet, that there would be a group of words like the rosy things of the Lord that were attached to a person or event. And one of the advantages of that was that it's poetry, so it's got a strict meter.
And also it's good spelling.
So yeah, precisely. So if you've got too many, in fact, you see this. If there are too many syllables per line, she becomes callous. There are a few more. She becomes Athena, or she becomes Pallas Athena. This is what it's amazing. These are
Sorry, Rena. No, you were saying Rena. No, yes, yeah. She is a goddess of war, absolutely. Yeah. And after whom Athens is named, of course. Sorry, Susan, did you want to?
say, Susan, the introduction talks about the measure of the, it doesn't rhyme, it has internal rhythm, and that's why the words, they actually have to use certain words. The long, short, long, long.
Yeah.
It was, which sounded fascinating, but obviously, I feel, poetry, very foreign to us, very strict, and it would be tricky trying to fit the words in.
Well, you think of Shakespeare and iambic pentameter, or the meter of a sonnet, or other things like that. But Fagles has taken the decision not to follow that because it doesn't. It doesn't resonate with us because, well, for one, we don't speak Greek, and also we're just not familiar with that particular rhythm.
Because I mean, women really sideline in the bodies, they are bodies. So that she had to be in order to be
No, she's a beautiful grey-eyed goddess. But whether she needs that kind of that palace kind of male authority to give her credibility, I'm not quite so clear.
I think it's gender from a personal power that runs the earth. But she couldn't be as a woman. No, I'm not saying that she appeared as a Titan, she appeared as herself. I just was interested that the name Pallas has this root into the earlier rule of order. Yeah, so I think it just means war, it doesn't really mean male war. I don't know, it's around rambling on.
No, it's just the dark tale, but did she appear as a man?
Yeah, sorry, but not as a god. She's either a goddess, but she can inhabit the
She has
flashing eyes. Yeah. That, yes, and associated with the owl, and the origin of our term mentor. She kind of takes on. I don't quite know why. It must be it can't be a coincidence that first of all she's mentees and then she's mentor. I don't know what is going on there. I haven't read anybody give us an explanation. So we meet again in 2 weeks' time, and we'll review books 2 and 3, and then preview book 4. Excellent. Thank you.